Hey folks, Labruski here, back in a new comics corner. Now, as you may be able to tell, we are in a new setup. I rearranged my room. That way I can get more of my comic books in the shots. And we have this shelf over here. So, today I want to talk about a fundamental book if you are interested in learning how to make comic books, or really, as the title suggests, just understanding comics. So that is Understanding Comics, The Invisible Art by Scott McCloud. But before we dive into that, if you could please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe, that would be greatly appreciated. It helps out the channel a whole bunch. Okay, I'm going to give a kind of a really quick review of this book. I really, for this video, I want to more talk about the contents of the book, the meat of it. So if you are interested in reading this book, and not, I mean, I guess you could spoil it. It's a nonfiction book, right? So there's no plot or characters really to it. But if you just want to read it, kind of going blind, totally get that. Go read it. It's a great book, and come back to this video and let me know what you think in the comment section down below. But I do want to really dive into each chapter. There's 9 chapters in total, and I want to touch upon each one. But to give this book a quick review, like I said, it's a great read, and if you have any interest in comic books or making comic books, definitely check it out. But it can read kind of dense at times. Like, there's a lot to this book, and the author, Scott McCloud, throws a lot at you, a lot of ideas, theories, concepts, all that stuff. And it can be a lot to take in. So I do suggest, if you read this book, read like one chapter a day, and that's it. I mean, there were times where the chapters are longer, so I would read a chapter, or even read like half a chapter, and then come back. I take notes, and I wanted to make this video to really digest all the contents of the material. But I will say, if you want to digest all the material and understand it to its full potential, I would suggest taking notes, because it almost reads like a textbook at times. And I took a college class about comic books that was the history of comics, and then I took another one about the graphic storytelling. And we read, not this one, we read Making Comics. I believe that's what it's called. And yeah, so these books definitely kind of almost read like a textbook at times. But like I said, it's still a great read, but it can just be a little dense at times and a lot to take in. So just go slow with it. That would be my big suggestion to you, because if you don't, you're just going to miss out on a lot of ideas and concepts, and you won't get the full rewards of reading this book in its entirety. Okay, so the first chapter is called Setting the Record Straight, and it's really about establishing that comics is a medium within itself, right? So it's not lumped in with like novels or art, right? It's its own medium. I guess it's kind of a medium of art itself. Anyhow, like TV and movies, that's a medium, right? Comics is its own medium. And he spends the first chapter breaking down and creating a good definition for comics that is definitely a broad umbrella definition, but it covers comics as a whole. So that definition, and I'm just going to read it off, is I always struggle with that word. Juxtaposed pictorial and other images in deliberate sequence intended to convey information and or to produce an aesthetic response in the viewer. So essentially, it's a story being told through pictures and sequential art, right? And he spends a lot of the book going back to this definition and kind of supporting this definition that he came up with. So yeah, that in a nutshell is the first chapter of this book. So the second chapter is all about the vocabulary of comics. So he established in the first chapter that it is a medium, and when you have a medium, right, you need to have a vocabulary right? So I will probably look down at my iPad again just to kind of make sure I get some stuff right. Um, and the vocabulary that he comes up with is a triangle, right? And each point has a different thing that represents comics. And in this triangle is everything that makes comics. Okay, so one point is reality. So that's more kind of the more realistic art, right? Um, the Another point is the language, the written word, and then the final and third point is the picture plane. So that's more the realm of art objects, right? The more abstract art, if you will. And so he creates this triangle, and like I said, within that triangle is the entire vocabulary of comic books as a whole. And he does a really good job giving examples of different famous comic books and kind of putting them where they belong in the triangle to back up his claim, right? And then also within this chapter, he breaks down some definitions. Okay, so he breaks down what an icon is. An icon is any image used to represent a person, place, or thing. Okay, so he also says that words are the most iconic icons, I suppose, and they're the most abstract icon that we see in comics, right? Because if we think about it, right, the more realistic something is, right? Let's say a picture of a person, right? You're really not going to need any perceived knowledge to understand. Oh, that's a picture or a drawing of a person. Okay, it's received, right? You see it, you get it. Whereas on the other spectrum of that is where language falls in place, and that's where perceived is, right? So you need knowledge to understand what words are, right? That's, they teach it in school, obviously, so it's not something that is just that you can get right away. Okay, it takes practice, and so icon fits in with that definition of the vocabulary triangle, let's call it. Um, and it's really more geared towards the bottom, right? The realistic and the written word, right? Language. And any icon can fall in on that line, essentially. And he also says that cartoons, right? He defines what a cartoon is, and that essentially is amplification through simplification, right? So take a picture of a smiley face, a circle, two dots, and then a curved line, right? We recognize that as a face. Okay, so that's a pretty abstract thing, and we can see ourselves within that cartoon, right? Because there's not so many details, so it amplifies it through simplification. Hopefully that makes sense. This chapter two in particular is very, very meaty. He breaks down a lot, and he spends a lot of the chapter and a lot of the book really just kind of defining the vocabulary of comic books, and he always goes back to icons and symbols and whatnot. So this chapter is probably one of the most important chapters in this book, if I'm being honest. Okay, so chapter 3 is titled Blood in the Gutter. And this chapter examines the space in between the panels. Okay. And this is where what he calls closure happens. Okay. And closure is observing the parts, but perceiving the whole. So let's say I show you a picture of a person hiding behind a wall and just kind of peeking their head out, right? You can perceive the whole that there is a body in the rest of the face behind that wall, right? But you're only seeing part of their head or part of their face, right? So that is closure, essentially. You are picking up in your mind where everything goes and making a complete picture out of it. And we do this a lot in comic books. And closure and the gutter is really kind of what makes the it's the magic of comic books, if you will. And he talks about six different transitions that we see in comic books. Okay, so he talks about the moment to moment transition. Now, this is um, essentially just 1 second to another second, right? It's the time that's perceived in this transition is a second or two, right? Now, the second transition that he talks about is the action to action transition. Okay, so this is action to action, right? So the time is um, more spaced out, essentially. Three is subject to subject. Four is scene to scene, so you're switching scenes. Five, aspect to aspect, so it could be the zooming out panels, right? So one panel is very close up, the next not is zoomed out a little bit, third very zoomed out. And then the sixth and final transition that he talks about is non sequitur. Now, this is essentially transitions that each panel really does not seem like they have anything to do with each other, right? So one panel we have a picture of like a banana, the next we have a picture of a bike, and that's it, right? So there is no correlation between those two pictures. And now this transition, the non sequitur, is the least common transition that we see in comic books because comics tend to tell a story. So in order to tell a story, you need to have things kind of make sense in context. And non sequitur just does not fall into that realm of context and usually does not serve a purpose in the story. Okay, so chapter 4 is time frame. So this chapter is all about time in comics and how that works. And he essentially explains time in comics is a messy thing, right? It does not make sense. But there's certain techniques and stuff that the creator uses to convey time, right? So I have written down 4 techniques or 4 illusions that comics use to convey time, right? So we have sound effects, the gutter, right? Words, and then motion in the panel itself. So the contents of the story help convey the time within comics. So the contents define time in comic books. Okay, so chapter 5 is living in line. Now, this is the chapter that kind of breaks down more the contents within the panel itself. So the actual drawing in a panel, right? And it's all about the idea that a picture can evoke an emotion in the reader, and different ways to represent emotion. And it really all comes down to just creative choice by the writer or artist to convey that sort of emotions. But there are a few different ways and tips and tricks that you can use to do that successfully, right? So you have certain symbols that convey motion, right? Backgrounds can help convey motion. And then most importantly, the word balloon, right? The words can convey emotion in comic books. All right, chapter 6, folks. And this chapter is show and tell. Now, this chapter breaks down the relationship between the written word and then the pictures. So, Scott McCloud explains that that relationship is pretty much like a dance, right? Either the picture is kind of leading the story and the word is just following, or vice versa, right? The words are leading the story and the pictures are kind of following, right? It's like a dance. So there's 7 different combinations that he explores. So I'm going to talk about each one. So the first one is word specific. This is when pictures illustrate but don't add to the story. So this is more when words kind of lead the story along. The next one we have is picture specific. This is when words are more just a soundtrack to the picture. So pictures lead the story. And then the third one we have is duo specific. So both words and pictures send the same exact message. And then we have additive. This is when words amplify or elaborate on an image or vice versa, right? Then we have parallel. Words and pictures seem to follow very different courses when it comes to intersecting. Okay. And then we have montage. Words are treated as integral parts of the picture. And then the final one we have is interdependent. Words and pictures go hand in hand to convey an idea. Now, I would say this is very important. This is probably the most important chapter, I would say, um, for this book, because it breaks down how to write a comic in a lot of ways, right? And a lot of these combinations seem to um, almost be the same thing if you break it down. So it's very important that you spend a lot of time with this chapter in particular, to really understand each combination of words and pictures. Okay, folks, just three more. I promise we are almost there. If you've been watching, thank you so much. But the seventh chapter is titled The Six Steps. Now, this is really, this chapter just breaks down the creative process, not only for comics, but for anything that you make, right? So he talks about six steps when creating something. So those six steps are one, idea, purpose, the work's content. Uh, Two, form, type of medium, right? So this is where you choose, do I want to write a comic? Do I want to make a movie? Do I want to write a book? Three, idiom. This is the school of art. So this is kind of the the vocabulary triangle. Four, structure. This is putting it together. Five, craft. This is the constructing of the work. And then six, surface, the finishing look. And Scott McCloud does a really good job using an analogy to kind of break this down, and uses the analogy of an apple. So I'll put a graph up of that, and I think that does a great job really breaking down the six steps of any creative process. So, chapter 8 is titled A Word About Color. Now, this is definitely a shorter chapter, and it just talks a little bit about the history of color in comic books, about additive and subtractive colors, right? So, it just kind of breaks that down. Okay, and so chapter 9, this is the final chapter, is titled Putting It All Together. And this just essentially wraps up all the ideas in the book, and touches upon a little bit about where the future of comics may lie. And it wraps this book up in a nice, neat little bow. Okay, guys, we have reached the end of the video. If you have watched the entirety of this video, thank you so much. That means so much to me. And Scott McCloud has, I believe, two other books kind of in the same vein as Understanding Comics. He has Making Comics and Reinventing Comics. Now, I own Making Comics, and I think I only read a portion of it for my class, and I don't have Reinventing Comics. But if you guys want to see another type of video like this, where I kind of break down the contents of the book itself, please let me know in the comment section down below. I had a fun time making this video, and hopefully I can retain some of the information in this book, because like I said, there's a lot, and I in this video, I really just touched upon kind of the tip of the iceberg of each of these. So if you do end up reading it, you will kind of understand what I mean. And I would love to hear your guys' thoughts down in the comment section down below if you have read it or if you plan on reading it. So that's going to do it for today's video. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you have not done so already. And we will see you in the next Comics Corner.